must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher, until at last it was near enough so he could drink. In a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. The Cock and the Fox. A fox was caught in a trap one fine morning because he had got too near the farmer's hen house. No doubt he was hungry, but that was not an excuse for stealing. A cock, rising early, discovered what had happened. He knew the fox could not get at him, so he went a little closer to get a good look at his enemy. The fox saw a slender chance of escape. "Dear friend," he said, "I was just on my way to visit a sick relative when I stumbled into this string and got all tangled up. But please do not tell anybody about it. I dislike causing sorrow to anybody, and I am sure I can soon gnaw the string to pieces." But the cock was not to be so easily fooled. He soon roused the whole hen yard, and when the farmer came running out, that was the end of Mr. Fox. The wicked deserve no aid. The Cat and the Old Rat. There once was a cat who was so watchful that a mouse hardly dared show the tip of his whiskers for fear of being eaten alive. The cat seemed to be everywhere at once, with his claws all ready for a pounce. At last the mice kept so closely to their dens that the cat saw he would have to use his wits well to catch one. So one day he climbed up on a shelf and hung from it, head downward, as if he were dead, holding himself up by clinging to some ropes with one paw. When the mice peeped out and saw him in that position, they thought he had been hung up there in punishment for some misdeed. Very timidly at first they stuck out their heads and sniffed about carefully. But as nothing stirred, all trooped joyfully out to celebrate the death of the cat. Just then the cat let go of his hold, and before the mice recovered from their surprise, he had made an end of 3 or 4. Now the mice kept more strictly at home than ever, but the cat, who was still hungry for mice, knew more tricks than one. Rolling himself in flour until he was covered completely, he lay down on the floor bin with one eye open for the mice. Sure enough, the mice soon began to come out. To the cat it was almost as if he already had a plump young mouse under his claws, when an old rat, who had had much experience with cats and traps, and had even lost a part of his tail to pay for it, sat up at a safe distance from a hole in the wall where he lived. "Take care," he cried, "that may be a heap of meal, but it looks to me very much like the cat. Whatever it is wisest to keep at a safe distance." The wise do not let themselves be tricked a second time. The Cat and the Fox. Once a cat and a fox were traveling together. As they went along, picking up provisions on the way, a stray mouse here, a fat chicken there, they began an argument to while away the time between bites. And as usually happens when comrades argue, the talk began to get personal. "You think you are extremely clever, don't you?" said the fox. "Do you pretend to know more than I? Why, I know a whole sackful of tricks." Well, retorted the cat, I admit I know one trick only, but that one, let me tell you, is worth 1,000 of yours. Just then, close by, they heard a hunter's horde and the yelping of a pack of hounds. In an instant, the cat was up a tree, hiding among the leaves. This is my trick, he called to the fox. Now let me see what yours are worth. But the fox had so many plans for escape, he could not decide which one to try first. He dodged here and there with the hounds at his heels. He doubled on his tracks. He ran at top speed. He entered a dozen burrows, but all in vain. The hounds caught him, and soon put an end to the boaster and all his tricks. Common sense is always worth more than cunning. The Cat and the Birds. A cat was growing very thin. As you have guessed, he did not get enough to eat. One day he heard that some birds in the neighborhood were ailing and needed a doctor. So he put on a pair of spectacles, and with a leather box in his hand, knocked at the door of the birds' home. The birds peeped out, and Dr. Cat, with much solicitude, asked how they were. He would be very happy to give them some medicine. Tweet, tweet, laughed the birds. Very smart, aren't you? We are very well, thank you, and more so, if you only keep away from here. Be wise and shun the quack. The Cat, the Cock, and the Young Mouse. A very young mouse, who had never seen anything of the world, almost came to grief the very first time he ventured out, and this is the story he told his mother about his adventures. I was strolling along very peaceably when, just as I turned to the corner into the next yard, I saw two strange creatures. One of them had a very kind and gracious look, but the other was the most fearful monster you can imagine. You should have seen him. On top of his head and in front of his neck hung pieces of raw red meat. He walked about restlessly, tearing up the ground with his shoes and beating his arms savagely against his sides. The moment he caught sight of me, he opened his pointed mouth as if to swallow me, and then he let out a piercing roar that frightened me almost to death. Can you guess who it was that our young mouse was trying to describe to his mother? It was nobody but the barnyard cock, and the first one the little mouse had ever seen. If it had not been and stretching up on tiptoes, seemed to be looking at something afar off. "What is it you see?" asked the fox a little anxiously. "Why, it looks to me like a couple of dogs coming this way. They must have heard the good news and—" But the fox did not wait to hear more. Off he started on a run. "Wait," cried the cock. "Why do you run? The dogs are friends of yours now." "Yes," answered the fox, "but they might not have heard the news. Besides, I have a very important errand that I had almost forgotten about." The cock smiled as he buried his head in his feathers and went to sleep, for he had succeeded in outwitting a very crafty enemy. The trickster is easily tricked. The Cock and the Jewel. A cock was busily scratching and scraping about to find something to eat for himself and his family, when he happened to turn up a precious jewel that had been lost by its owner. "Ah," said the cock, "no doubt you are very costly, and he who lost you would give a great deal to find you. But as for me, I would choose a single grain of barley corn before all the jewels in the